So I do think that what we do in life sciences does apply across the board. And so I'll tell you about my own experience and about the insight I've gathered through my own experiences. And so Annalisa had asked me to talk about funding and how creative we can be with money. And so I don't know how it is in your field, but in ours, we've been talking for many years about this funding climate, meaning it's a terrible funding climate for research, and so we have to be pretty creative how we use our money. But what I did figure out in 2020 hindsight is that a lot of what I've built as a younger scientist and then moving through the rank really has determined how I've done my success in funding. So in science, we often talk about having three aims, hypothesis and three aims. And my hypothesis initially was success follows hard work and brilliant ideas, right? And we all know it's not true. Okay? You can work as hard as you want and you can have great ideas, but if you don't know how to sell them, so it's all marketing. Even in science, it's completely about marketing and how you sell your ideas. So my 3 life lessons have been learn to say yes, and you'll see where I'm going with that. That's my lesson number 1. Squeak loudly, and that's because there are no rules, and I'll tell you about that too for funding. And third, and I think it's probably the most important, is be flexible. And I do think that applies across the board in whatever field you're in, whatever expertise. So first of all, when I say learn to say yes, now we all feel like we say yes too often. How many of you say, I have to learn how to say no? How many of you? Show of hands. We also say that, right? But that's because we say yes to the wrong things. We often get overburdened with sort of the details, and we often become, as women, the note takers in meetings. So I have a story where one of my staff members, who was slightly older than me, but had this gray beard and these little glasses, and he'd go into meetings and he would sit back in his chair and always put his glasses like this, as if he was really pondering whatever people were discussing. And I was taking notes until people told me, wow, your boss is really smart. And I said, who are you talking about? I'm my boss. And they said, that guy, you know, you work for that guy. Obviously, I was the note taker, right? Because I would deal with all the details all the time. So I decided I'm not the note taker anymore, but also that I would say no to the small stuff and yes to the big stuff. Now in projects, and that's true in technology, it's true in science, we're driven by projects, right? We have different projects. But when the higher ups or the boss or the funding agencies ask you to do something, often our reaction is, it's not my field of expertise. We want to fit exactly in what we've been trained for. So I've realized something. My field of expertise is that I know how to think. And I can apply it across the board. Now, I'm not going to start doing quantum physics, but if it has something to do even remotely to what I've been trained in, I know I can do it. So now if people tell me, so Elodie, could you? I say, yep, I can do it. Then I'll say, oh boy, how am I going to do that? So what I know how to do, and Rajiva had said, I really liked your idea about being a connector also, to know how to connect people. And so I've realized that I am a connector and I speak 2 languages. I'm a computational biologist. I'm weak on the computational side, but I have really good computational people in my team. And I can speak the language of the bench biologist, and I can speak the language of the computational person, so I can bring experts together. So now if I'm asked to do something, I know I can bring it together. So that was my first lesson, the learn how to say yes. And that, I think, is a good lesson in general. And also, in that same context, it's to collaborate. So if you bring expertise together, that means you're bringing different people, and you have to let your ego go. And I think that's easy for women in general. I think we're used to working in teams, and we're used to sharing sort of the success. And so I don't think that's too difficult for us to do. So the second point I had was to squeak loudly, and that would come from the metaphor, the squeaky wheel, etc. And you know the story, okay? And that's because often we think there are set rules that actually don't exist. And as girls, and I know I'm like that, I have to work on that. I always think there are rules and I'm going to be a good girl and I'm going to follow all the rules, okay? And it turns out there weren't any rules. And that's true for funding. So funders, for example, when you apply for a grant, you follow the instructions, which is good. You have to follow the instructions. And we saw how this morning David Tetton was talking about when people don't follow instructions. Well, there are instructions that are good, but there are others, there are rules that are not written that we think exist. For example, we think that we're not allowed to pick up the phone to talk to someone. You were mentioning send emails to the boss, and that's true. You can send emails to the boss, but it's true for funding also. You can actually call. In my field, we ask for money at the National Institutes of Health, and it turns out you can call a program officer and ask him, what is it you're looking for? And they'll tell you. So there are no rules about not speaking to other people. But also, I've noticed that to be able to get money, you have to, and be successful in what you're doing, you have to have been a people person. We have to become more people persons. And that is not to not make enemies, but it's to make friends. And I've noticed throughout the years that little by little, without noticing, I had built my own old boys network. I can pick up the phone and call a lot of people that I interacted with. So at conferences, for example, there's nothing more that I would like to do when it's a multi-day conference. In the evening, after the sessions, all I want to do is go to my room, put my bunny slippers on, and watch stupid TV, okay? But I don't do it. I go down, I'll even go down to the bar where the boys are hanging out, and I'll have a scotch. I hate scotch, but I'll have it right there. And then I'll talk to people, and I'll be really cool. They're like, wow, she's really cool. And I'm like, but you have to do it, because actually you're interacting with people. And as much as scientists, we'd like to think that we're data-driven and not emotionally oriented, but actually we have strong likes, strong dislikes, and if I know someone, somebody knows me, they'll think of me when time comes, because especially in my field, we all sit on study sections reviewing grants, so we all the time evaluate our colleagues. So you never know who's going to be reading your grant. You never know who's going to become a program officer. That means a person that decides whether your project is funded or not. So these personal connections are incredibly important. And you may not see them in the short term, but eventually it will all come together. You'll see, I promise, it'll all come together. And you'll finally realize that those contacts you made over 2 years, 5 years, 10 years do lead to something positive. So that was my second point. And my third point is actually to be flexible in your approach. Okay, so in this funding period that I'm talking about, where funding has been so difficult, well, what we realize is that funders, people with money, have become risk averse. And you can imagine how difficult that is when you're talking about science, right? Science is supposed to be such a creative endeavor. So there was a really good editorial piece that was written 2 years ago by a professor from Brandeis University, Greg Petsko, and he writes for a journal called Genome Biology. I'm a genomics person. I decode genomes of viruses, bacteria, and parasites. So I read genome biology, but then I started circulating this editorial to a lot of my friends in the biomedical field that don't do genomics, but really that story resonated with them. So what he did is that he actually reimagined the story of Christopher Columbus, who was going to go on this voyage to discover America. And he was asking for funding to go on that trip. And Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand tell him, it's a little risky. We don't know what you're going to find. He goes, well, yeah, that's the whole point. That's discovery. So they said, actually, we'll fund you to go to Lisbon. And he says, Lisbon? I've been to Lisbon in Portugal. people have been to Lisbon. And they said, exactly. That's because funders, that's what they do now. They fund what they know will be successful, which seems totally counterintuitive, but that's the risk-averse part. So what we can do as scientists or as technologists or looking for funds for our pet project, we can either just really get bent out of shape about it, which we all do, or you can reimagine how going to Lisbon, maybe I can do something really cool on my way to Lisbon. Or maybe I can sort of transform my idea so that it fits within the larger context of what the funders are ready to fund, right? So in my own research, I had this one project that I thought was absolutely brilliant. The reviewers didn't agree, the funders didn't agree, and the reviewers would say, either the kiss of death in reviews is too ambitious, as if that was a crime. And it was, the methods haven't developed yet. And so I developed the methods, and they said, okay, the methods work, but we don't know if the question is a good one. So then I demonstrated that actually it was a good one. They said, yeah, but nobody cares anymore. So, you're always running after it. So I did end up getting it funded, but indirectly under the auspices of a different project. And with the funders being totally aware that I was doing that, it's because it just could fit any which way you want. And I sort of twisted it a bit, and in a sense, it became a better project because by having to find a way to make it fit under somebody else's agenda, it made me more creative in how to adapt my story. So these are my 3 points of advice for today. So it was, learn to say yes. So you got to go for the big stuff, not the small stuff. You have to realize there are no rules. Sometimes you can just cut to the chase and talk to the right people. Develop your own old boys network and be flexible and understand what the greater needs are and how you can fit in them. That's it. Thank you very much for listening.